On May 23, 2026, the most significant diplomatic reversal of the 21st century reached its final stage. There was no formal declaration, no treaty cancellation, no televised condemnation of the 47-year Islamic Republic that China had spent decades building as a critical energy partner and a strategic balance against American influence in the Persian Gulf. The shift revealed itself through silence. Through the actions, Beijing quietly stopped taking. China halted the transfer of BEU satellite reconnaissance support to the IRGC targeting system. China ended maintenance of the Huawei-built encrypted communications network that Iran had relied upon for sensitive military and financial exchanges through channels American intelligence agencies struggled to penetrate fully. China also stopped facilitating financial transaction routing through Chinese banking intermediaries that had enabled the IRGC offshore asset structure to function after the UAE shifted from permissive oversight to active freezing of Iranian shell companies. At the Beijing summit, President Xi Jinping faced the American president and publicly endorsed outcomes the Islamic Republic had always believed China would refuse to support. The Strait of Hormuz must remain open. No military equipment would be provided to Iran. China would purchase 600,000 barrels per day of American crude oil under a wider energy security arrangement. And Xi stated that if China could help Iran, it would, but it cannot. That sentence represented the exact diplomatic wording Iranian strategists had spent decades hoping never to hear from Beijing. They heard it, and the Strait of Hormuz will never look the same again. To understand why China's reversal is not temporary diplomacy or a short-term response to American pressure, it is necessary to understand what the China-Iran partnership truly involved. It extended far beyond discounted oil purchases. In March 2021, China and Iran signed a 25-year comprehensive cooperation agreement. Publicly, the deal promised approximately $400 billion in Chinese investment across Iranian infrastructure, ports, rail systems, telecommunications, energy sites, and industrial facilities. In exchange, China secured long-term discounted Iranian crude oil supplies at favorable pricing designed to offset sanctions risks. That was the public version. The operational relationship extended much further. The Huawei communications infrastructure deployed across major Iranian cities and government compounds was not merely commercial equipment. It formed the encrypted backbone used by the IRGC for high-level command and control traffic. The routing systems and encryption standards were designed in China, not Iran, and were significantly harder for American systems to penetrate. China's BEU satellite constellation, a 35-satellite network developed as an alternative to the American GPS framework, provided navigation data and reconnaissance support. The IRGC used that information for targeting systems that Iran's own satellite capabilities could not match in resolution or update speed. When IRGC cruise missiles struck the Figueira terminal on May 4th, the targeting information guiding those missiles toward infrastructure on the UAE eastern coastline came from somewhere. BU was part of that structure. When IRGC fast attack boats moved through the Strait in coordinated formations, their awareness of American naval positioning came from somewhere as well. Chinese satellite data sharing formed part of that operational picture. The financial dimension reached even deeper. The offshore financial network described by Secretary Besant, built over 4 decades through diverted Iranian wealth, continued operating after American and UAE financial pressure intensified. Chinese banking intermediaries, located in Hong Kong, Macau, and Shanghai, became the transaction routes used by IRGC-linked entities after the UAE tightened restrictions. These institutions operated outside the most aggressive American sanctions enforcement zones while maintaining correspondent banking relationships, capable of moving funds through less visible channels. That was the real structure of the partnership: satellite intelligence, encrypted communications, financial routing, diplomatic protection at the United Nations Security Council. All of it has now been scaled back. The calculation behind China's reversal did not suddenly emerge during the Beijing summit. Beijing had been working through the numbers for years. The current conflict simply forced the conclusion: China imports 11.6 million barrels of crude oil every day. Iran supplies approximately 1.6 million barrels daily through discounted sales established under the cooperation agreement. That equals roughly 13.8% of China's oil imports. The Gulf states, including the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, and Qatar, together provide around 40% of China's imported crude moving through the Strait of Hormuz. The arithmetic became unavoidable. If the strait closes or becomes unstable, China does not merely risk losing 13.8% of supply tied to Iran. It risks the shipping route connected to 53.8% of total daily oil imports. Iranian crude cannot replace the combined Gulf volume threatened by disruption in Hormuz. The quantities are too different. Iranian supply also remains constrained by sanctions and blockade enforcement, regardless of Chinese willingness to continue purchases. China's energy security depends on an open Strait of Hormuz. This is not an American talking point. It is a calculation built around 53.8% versus 13.8%. No strategic planner could ignore those numbers. Another major factor involved the Belt and Road Initiative. Coverage of China's reversal largely ignored the financial condition inside China itself. Chinese banks that financed Belt and Road projects now face increasing stress from loan defaults across multiple countries, where economic deterioration undo. That final sentence was the most carefully constructed diplomatic statement among the four commitments. It closed the path for Chinese military and intelligence assistance to Iran while still preserving diplomatic appearance. Xi was not openly declaring that China had abandoned Iran. Instead, he framed the situation as one created by circumstances beyond Beijing's control. The practical outcome remained identical. China would no longer assist Iran, but the wording mattered. It allowed a 47-year relationship to be reduced without the humiliation of a public abandonment announcement that could weaken China's credibility with other governments depending on Beijing as protection against American pressure. This is how Beijing withdraws from partnerships that no longer fit its strategic interests, not through direct declarations, but through the language of limitation and incapacity. The IRGC leadership understands exactly what that means operationally, even while the diplomatic framing maintains the public illusion. The withdrawal of Chinese intelligence support carries major consequences for the IRGC's military capability inside the Strait of Hormuz. This area has received little public attention, yet it represents one of the most serious practical effects of China's repositioning. The BEU satellite network was not simply a convenience for Iranian targeting systems. It became essential after Operation Epic Fury destroyed large portions of Iran's organic intelligence collection structure. The IRGC coastal radar systems, ship-based sensors, and shore surveillance networks were among the first targets during the opening phase of Epic Fury. Reducing Iran's awareness of American naval movement was necessary before later stages of the operation could proceed. When radar coverage identifying American destroyer locations disappears, the IRGC loses the precision required to coordinate fast attack boat formations without immediate engagement risk. The events of May 4th, when 6 fast boats were destroyed in 10 minutes, demonstrated exactly what happens when those formations lose accurate awareness of American positioning. Chinese BEU intelligence filled that gap. Even after Iranian radar coverage inside the Strait was degraded, the IRGC could still maintain a current operational picture through Chinese satellite imagery updated at modern reconnaissance speed. That picture no longer exists. The IRGC now operates remaining naval assets using a weakened domestic sensor network created by Epic Fury. Coastal radar coverage is reduced. Shipborne systems operate without the protected communication links once provided through Huawei infrastructure. Mobile surveillance units no longer receive integrated satellite support from the BEU arrangement. Under the previous structure, IRGC fast attack boat commanders moved through the Strait in groups of 2 or 3 vessels during each observation cycle. Now they possess a far weaker understanding of where AH-1Z Vipers are positioned, where Arleigh Burke destroyers are operating, and how American naval tactical formations are arranged at any moment. At the same time, they face a defensive system built around the A-Spy-6 radar, capable of tracking every contact in the Strait with 100 times the sensitivity of earlier generations, alongside Helios systems delivering speed-of-light engagement capability against confirmed threats. This is not a tactical challenge, solvable through bravery or doctrine. It is an information imbalance the IRGC no longer possesses the tools to correct. The Huawei communications infrastructure created another critical vulnerability. The removal of the encrypted communication backbone installed and maintained by Chinese technical personnel across Iran's military and government systems may produce the longest-lasting consequences for both internal security and military coordination. Huawei systems are not standalone hardware that continue functioning indefinitely after installation. They depend on software updates, security maintenance, and technical support from teams with direct access to source code and system architecture. Once Chinese technical personnel stop providing support, either through formal withdrawal or the end of the intelligence sharing relationship that justified their presence, the encryption systems used by the IRGC for sensitive communications become increasingly exposed to American and Israeli signals intelligence capabilities. The RC-135 Rivet Joint Electronic Intelligence aircraft, operating across the theater since before February 28th, has been continuously gathering signals intelligence. Those systems are not passively waiting for Iranian mistakes. They are actively building exploitation databases capable of mapping communication patterns, protocol structures, and emerging vulnerabilities, appearing as the Huawei infrastructure ages without ongoing Chinese maintenance. The Huawei dimension of China's reversal does not produce an instant collapse for Iranian capability. Instead, it creates a gradual deterioration unfolding across weeks and months as security weaknesses emerge and signals intelligence systems exploit them. The financial consequences are equally severe. The removal of Chinese banking intermediaries from the IRGC offshore financial routing structure represents the financial warfare component that Operation Economic Fury was designed to exploit. Secretary Bessent described the Treasury Department's offshore asset tracking effort in language revealing the depth of American financial intelligence penetration. The IRGC possesses offshore assets. The Treasury located them. The administration intends to continue identifying those holdings and preserve them for the Iranian people after the conflict ends. Chinese financial intermediaries operating through Hong Kong and Shanghai, correspondent banking relationships, had previously provided the complexity that shielded IRGC-linked financial movements from easier detectio. The Strait has become more restricted for Iranian commerce after the Beijing summit because the IRGC no longer receives Chinese assistance identifying weaknesses in American surveillance collection. The global oil market reacted immediately to this shift. Before the summit in Beijing, oil prices included a major risk premium tied to fears of a long-term closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Traders understood that the duration of any disruption depended on negotiations between the United States and Iran, a process whose outcome remained highly uncertain. Those expecting China to stand beside Iran during a broader confrontation maintained a premium in oil prices tied to the possibility of a multi-year disruption in Hormuz, supported diplomatically and potentially militarily by Beijing. The Beijing summit removed that extreme scenario from the equation. Once China publicly committed itself to keeping Hormuz open and declared that it would not provide military equipment to Iran, the possibility of China blocking American enforcement operations effectively disappeared. The Chinese deterrence factor was removed from market calculations. What remains in the premium now is uncertainty surrounding the diplomatic timeline and the possibility of further IRGC escalation during the remaining period of confrontation. Those risks still exist, but they are now far more limited because of China's repositioning. Brent crude, moving toward the $119 level after the Figueres strike, reflected the highest stage of the premium calculation before the Beijing summit took place. After the summit, market direction shifted toward compression of that premium because the most extreme risk scenario involving Chinese intervention no longer appeared realistic. Qatar's projection of elevated energy prices lasting 2 to 3 years had been made before Beijing removed the Chinese deterrence factor from Iran's strategic position. The crisis itself remains unresolved. The blockade continues. Uranium remains inside the tunnels. The IRGC still refuses the nuclear concession demanded by the American Red Line. But the disappearance of the Chinese deterrence option compressed the outer edge of risk calculations in ways the global energy market has already begun pricing as lower danger compared to 48 hours earlier. The regional consequences spread quickly across the Saudi, UAE, Bahrain, and Qatar coalition. Throughout the conflict, Gulf Arab governments had operated under the assumption that direct strikes against Iranian territory carried the danger of provoking a Chinese diplomatic response that could complicate American backing and generate international pressure for early de-escalation. Saudi Arabia's cruise missile strike against the IRGC command center at Bandar Abbas and the UAE's confirmed offensive attacks on Iranian oil infrastructure were carried out under that constraint. Those operations were designed with ambiguity and deniability to avoid triggering direct Chinese escalation in response to openly acknowledged Arab military operations against Iran. The Beijing summit fundamentally changed that environment. When China publicly endorsed an open Hormuz and described IRGC escalation as undesirable, Beijing used the strongest diplomatic wording available within its system to signal disapproval toward Iranian actions. As a result, Gulf Arab military options against Iranian targets lost the Chinese diplomatic complication that had previously served as a major deterrent. Every scenario involving maximum escalation in the conflict already described the possibility of an Arab coalition. That coalition now stands one Chinese abstention or positive vote away from obtaining the international legitimacy framework required to formalize military operations under Article 51 self-defense provisions. The summit moved such an Please leave your thoughts about this content in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.